flooding down in the Brentwood area and Franklin namely, and that rides all the way up into Bellevue. But these pictures perhaps have been some of the most dramatic that we've seen. This is the Opryland Hotel Complex, the resort there, and the aerial pictures are stunning. This is, of course, the Bass Pro Shop over at Opry Mills shopping area, and that's a wider look of the shopping area. There's the General Jackson. It's sitting in what's supposed to be the Cumberland River. The Cumberland has, the width of the Cumberland has increased by fourfold at least, because it's not just the water comes up, but then once it hits an area over the banks, it starts spreading out very quickly, and that's what's taken so many people by surprise who have, you know, we know that this area can flood. It happened. This is where the Opryland theme park used to be. It flooded back in 1975 just as they were preparing to open the park. 79, there were troubles with our last two-day historic rainfall, which was less than half of what we received this time. Our totals this time are between 16 and 20 plus inches. Last time it was under 7 inches, so I think you can understand why we're seeing such extreme and epic flooding with this. The right-hand corner of your screen is the Grand Ole Opry House, and the smaller theater on the left-hand side. There's a lot of underground facility there that has been completely inundated, just like some of those downtown businesses here in the Nashville area. And so, you know, these are the exterior pictures. We're going to be showing you some of the interior pictures of the Gaylord Resort Hotel itself that will just stun you. So many people go over there, take family there to show off our beautiful city and some of the beautiful aspects of it. And you know, the rivers are some of our best assets, except in this situation where it has just destroyed lives. Look at those apartments there that you can see, homes by the hundreds and thousands, businesses, so many people, you know, struggling in these economic times. Their businesses are completely underwater. You can see the roadway is blocked there. Some of these businesses over off Music Valley Drive, while the Gaylord Opryland took about 1,500 people out last night, took them over to McGavock. We had another hotel there that had, goodness, several hundred guests that they ended up putting on the second floor today because they ended up with chest-high water on the first floor. We're going to show you some of the pictures of those evacuations. They had to bring in the duck boat from the Nashville Boat Tours. You know what I'm talking about, those land and water vehicles. They brought that in because they could take out more people at once. They had already had so many residents bring in their private boats. The Coast Guard was there. There were canoes and kayaks, you name it. They were there. That's the actual resort, the Gaylord Resort Hotel. But if you look off to the right, those are the other areas that have been impacted too, and you're looking at the Grand Ole Opry House. That, you know, and it's not a home, but it is part of Nashville and our economy here. The Titans Field is under 4 feet of water right now, so we are really looking at something that is beyond our wildest dreams as far as recovery goes. We've got, you know, thousands and thousands of people who have been evacuated from their homes, and we've got businesses that have been destroyed too. So the recovery is something we'll be talking about for days and months. We are getting ready now to bring you news to at 4. Remember, Metro schools are closed tomorrow, and many other
Guys, as you've seen, the May flood of 2010 in Nashville, Tennessee is reminiscent of a lot of floods that happen around the country. Those are the things that you want to prepare for when you're going into a large loss event. Don't drown in the sea of large losses, title of today's program. We want to talk to you about how to prepare for a large loss like that. We're going to be talking about extreme measures of the largest non-gaming hotel in the United States and in the top 30 in the world. So if you can handle these extreme areas and extreme jobs like this, you certainly can handle a very much smaller job. We want to talk about the things that went good on this job and the things that went bad on this job. The purpose of telling you the bad things are so you learn off of the mistakes that we made on the job and not learn off of new mistakes that you would make that would be costly to you. As the report said, about 13 inches of rain fell in a very short time on the Cumberland River. In the picture to the screen right there, you're in the middle. You'll see the Cumberland River is where the normal banks are. It's just a very, very small river in there. The little dot in the river is actually the river boat that you go out on for dinner cruises when you book that through the Opryland Hotel. And it sort of shows you how narrow that river is, but then what happens when you have an extreme amount of water that goes into it in a short period of time. As I said before, this is the largest non-gaming hotel in the United States and among the top 30 in the world. 2.1 million total square feet. And we're going to talk about some other parts of the building in a little bit, but that's only the total heated square feet, the part that the guests see, the part that the people who are visiting can see. Almost 3,000 guest rooms, indoor gardens, 9 acres under roof in those gardens, 700,000 square feet of meeting space, and another 145,000 of convention halls, 20 restaurants and bars. This is truly a city within a city, and now it's all underwater. The Cumberland River is usually 600 feet wide. So if you stop and think about it, that's only 2 football fields wide, the length of a football field. Not very wide, just a very narrow river. Many places in it are much more narrow, and it's 300 miles long. So it's a small river that runs through the center of Nashville, goes by the Titan Stadium, if you've ever been there, and runs straight through downtown. In the middle of the screen, or the top right of the screen rather, you'll see the Gaylord Opryland property on a normal day, and then just below that you'll see when it's inundated with the flood waters of the Cumberland. High-profile commercial losses are like jumping off of a cliff into the sea. A lot of unknown things there. A lot of pressure, a lot of different circumstances, and you need to be prepared to handle that to try to make it work. You certainly don't want to jump off the cliff as Homer's doing there and not hit the water, but the only worst thing you can do is jump off and hit the water and drown in that large lost sea, as we call it. So how do you get to the job site when the client says get there now? This is not the client. This is a client. It's probably the biggest client in the world that you'll ever see. These jobs don't come around every month or two. These jobs come around once or twice in your lifetime. They're huge. They're mammoth. It takes a lot of planning to be able to handle this job when it comes across. Road closures, and we're not talking about 1 or 2. We're talking about all of them. I-65 was closed. I-24 was closed. Briley Parkway leading up to the hotel was closed. It was total closure and everything. So how do you get to the job site? The client stayed there during the flood. When the flood waters started coming into the parking lot and into the first floor, the client decided to stay there because they could do what's called a vertical evacuation. In other words, they could climb the steps and go higher, and so they stayed there. But they're wanting somebody to get there to control their problem. So how do you get there? What do you do? Well, the answer is pretty simple. A helicopter is about the only way. So we took a helicopter into the scene to get to the scene, and when we got there, there obviously was no place to land except the little dry stretch of road that you'll see in your top right-hand corner of Briley Parkway. So we landed right in the middle of Briley Parkway, water on both ends of the road, and we jumped out of the helicopter and went to work. So we were able to get there while the floodwaters were actually still rising. They had not started to recede. Water was still coming in the building. We were not sure how deep that water would get into the building, but it already started, obviously, to come into the first floor of the building. I want you to keep in mind when you talk about the first floor of this building, they have underground floors. So the underground floors are already completely full, and now we have water on the first floor, which is at ground level. This is an initial look at the second floor. Nope, not the first one, but the second one. The first floor came in at ground level. This is the second floor. So now the total first floor is totally underwater, and you have water at about 30 inches into the atrium and garden areas of the second floor. I don't mention the underground city that we're going to talk about a little bit further into the slideshow that will tell you some other things about this particular property, and it's not surprising, but it's on a lot of other properties as well. So that's what we're saying when we walked into the second floor of the building. This is not something that very many people can handle on their own. So on this particular job, there wound up being 61 contractors and subcontractors and 8 different industrial hygienist companies to come in to work on this. You say, why 8 different industrial hygienists? We had industrial hygienists taking care of plants. There's one complete hygiene companies. Their only job was to save the rainforest, to save the gardens, to save all the plants that were throughout the building, whether they went underwater or not. How to clean those plants, how to get them free of bacteria, and how to save those once the water started going down. So this isn't something you can do yourself. Something that on this particular job took 61 subcontractors, from electricians to engineers to consultants, you name it, they pretty much were there. So the first thing you do is you think, woohoo, we got this job. We're here to dry all of the structures affected by the hotel property. All of the structures. The Opryland Hotel is only one structure of 28 on the property. So there were 27 other buildings on this property besides the hotel, and none of them are very small. So it was another mammoth project to be undertaking then. The things you have to consider to run a business is, how are you going to make money? How are you going to protect yourself from losing money? My dad often had a saying that I'm going to start at the bottom and go to the top. The saying is, pigs get fat and hogs go to slaughter. So when you get on something like this, don't try to be a hog and eat the elephant in one bite. Just take it slowly, and it's okay to get fat, but don't get so fat that you go to slaughter. Take your fair share and run on down the road. You got to know when to say when. The next thing up is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't make this more complex than it is. No, it's not a house that's 2.1 million houses in one. It is a large commercial building. It does have lots of other challenges to it, but keep it simple. You're still just drying a building. It just happens to be very large. And then at the top is the CDC, the 3 things that are most important to your company and to your family and your livelihood is contracts, documentation, and communication. You've got to have those 3 things in order when you get started on a job like this, so you don't wind up being the one taking a huge loss on a structure, or as this would be 28 structures such as this. So put a little planning into that, put a little thought on that. The time to think about this is not when you get out into the parking lot and trying to figure out how to wade from the helicopter to the second floor of the building. That's not a good time to think about this. You need to think about this long before a job of anywhere around this size comes in. And everything I say today, let me back up and say this. Everything I say this morning is going to reflect on a 50,000 square foot building or a 100,000 square foot building. They're all the same. They're just the size that makes them more enormous and makes you have to have more people and more things like that. But you have to have the same checklist. You have to have the same level of preparedness to do a job that's 100,000 square feet than you do one that is 2.1 million square feet. First thing we got to do is get the water out. Well, the water ran out of the first and second floor in a lot of areas that didn't have sunken areas of where you go down the steps to go down to a different level, which there were many. But for the most part, when the river went down, the water ran out of the second floor, pretty much all of it. A lot of the water ran out of the first floor. Well, then you have your basement floor. And under the basement floor, you've got a series of a whole nother city below ground. We were pumping 16,500 gallons a minute, and in 3 days, that was 71 million gallons of water that we pumped out of this building. Now, you say that's pretty slow to take 3 days to get the water out. It's done on purpose, again, along with a bunch of engineers that came in. You have hydrostatic pressure on the outside of the wall. You have hydrostatic pressure on the inside of a wall. This no matter what, it's a 2,000 square foot basement or a 2 million square foot basement. But if you pump that water out too quick, you can actually cause an implosion of the basement walls because your hydrostatic pressure on the outside will be greater than the inside, and it will collapse those walls. So anytime you're pumping out a below grade, subgrade structure, be sure it involves some engineers. Be sure that you pump it out in a timely fashion, but also pump it out fairly slow. Next thing we got to do is get some equipment in to start the drying process. The first trucks to arrive actually backed through about 5 feet of water to get there. And then they would pull up to the building and start running drying equipment in. That obviously was not to have any effect or any mitigation for the bottom 3 floors, as the second floor had several inches of water in it and the first was completely under. But this was to start the drying effects on the upper level floors of the hotel and of other buildings that did not get directly impacted by water, but obviously very high amounts of humidity. There was no air conditioning in the building. Humidity was real high. It was real hot. So we definitely needed to get control of the atmosphere to keep the entire building from becoming a big greenhouse of mold. So that's why we started with the building earlier. Took 74 tractor trailer truckloads of equipment for the initial setup of the job. That was all drying equipment and generators that came in from across the nation, as far away as California, and all across the nation, to be able to get enough equipment in to do this one building and its surrounding areas. Where's all that equipment and manpower come from? It comes from relationships that you need to build as you're before the storm ever hits, before water ever comes into the building. Subcontractors are important to you. They should be your best friend. You can't do this job by yourself. No one could. So you need to have people lined up that can help you and that can be friends with you and come in and help get this job done, because you're going to need a lot of help to get the job done. Production and documentation. In this particular case, we treated each of the 28 structures as a separate job. We started out that way because we thought maybe the insurance companies would need them separated out, and it wound up being a great thing to start it out that way, because that in fact was true. But it also allowed us to do 27 smaller jobs in one giant job. So it allowed us to be able to separate the project out a little bit. Different project managers on different job sites, different project managers on different buildings. So separate those jobs out. We also separated the main hotel into separate areas. The convention area was one location that we separated out into and had a project manager in charge of the convention areas. The guest rooms had a different project manager that was in charge of all the guest rooms, and that was their total job project that they were in charge of. We had a separate project manager in charge of the laundry facility. Let's talk about the laundry facility alone. It was the first part of the facility to get inundated by water. Some 55,000 square feet of laundry going on in that area. It also is connected to the power plant for the entire city, if that's what you would call it, but the entire resort. There is a section of underground tunnels that lead under the entire property, including under Briley Parkway, to go to the properties across, or should I say under Briley Parkway. So it's a whole series of tunnels, 40, 50, 60 miles of different tunnels. That's why you never see the employees of the Opryland Hotel pushing laundry carts down long hallways over to the other side of the building. The employees and the management team route themselves through the tunnels and up through the elevators to go to where they're going. So think about the tunnels. Now they're under the basement floor. So the second floor is full of water. The first floor was full of water, totally full of water. The second floor had 30 to 40 inches of water in it. The first floor is 100% underwater. The basement floor is 100% underwater, and below the basement is a city of tunnels. Those city of tunnels connected, again, the laundry room and every single building on the property. All of the electrical components for the entire resort ran through the tunnels, and they were all completely underwater for several days. There was $6 million worth of damage to the laundry room alone that stood in there. Now, within 72 hours of the first water entering into the first part of the building, there was over 1,000 people there working on this project to try to control what was happening and to try to start to get a handle on the mitigation scope to be able to get this facility back up and running. There's a little report on it here that I'm not going to bore you with reading the whole thing, but it's a good reading for later that tells you a little bit. And this is as it was seen from the director of the laundry facility alone at the resort. This don't have anything else to do with the folks in charge of the convention center or the other parts of the resort. We talked about tunnels. There's an actual picture of some of the tunnels. If you look directly overhead there, you'll see all the electrical wires, the chases, ductworks, dumbwaiter pipes, equipment is stored, and the phone's ringing, and you got to stop and answer your phone every now and then. And but lots of stuff going on in that resort area. So in that tunnel area that goes throughout the resort. Without these tunnels, the resorts don't operate. All your heating ducts go through there, your wiring, your computer cables, your phone cables, everything that's in it. So it don't matter if water had only gotten through the tunnel systems, the entire resort would have still been shut down. You can also see where they're storing extra chairs for resort stuff that may be coming along, and you know, a lot of extra stuff that are in those tunnels. These are the underground parts that you never see of the resorts that you go into. They're there. That's why the resorts are so pretty. You don't see people running around doing odd and end work because they're 2 or 3 stories below you. Lots of different buildings on the property. As I said, 28 other buildings besides the hotel itself. They are not included in the 2.1 million square feet that we talked about being in the hotel. The Showboat Theater was one of them. As you can see, that's probably a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot facility that had to be dried out, and water gotten into it up to the edge of the second floor. You had the Acuff Theater that was inundated with water. Again, lots of drying equipment that you can see in the photo that went around it, a lot of power equipment going on, a lot of damage done to the Acuff Theater. Most famous buildings on the property, the Grand Ole Opry, and you see a lot of things going into the Grand Ole Opry. You see equipment going in, you see the outside pictures, but you see the picture to the just to the right of Homer there speaking on his mic. That's the main stage door when the stars come into the Grand Ole Opry that they walk through and walk out onto the stage. And on the right hand side in the center, you'll actually see the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. And as you can see, it's totally covered in water. That floor in that area was over 100 years old for the hardwood floor, and needless to say, they wanted to try to salvage that floor. The salvage efforts were unsuccessful, but they did salvage enough of it to make a medallion in the center of the new floor that was put back into its place. So lots of different things, lots of memorabilia, lots of history, lots of museum artifacts and stuff that you have to put into this building, as well as a lot of other buildings that you would be working. Another building on there is the Grand Ole Opry Star House. Now, this is a star house that the limousines pull up to. They let the singers from the Grand Ole Opry come out, and they get out here and they go into this star house and they hang out in there and have hors d'oeuvres and drinks or whatever they want to drink before, during, and after the Grand Ole Opry show. And then there's going the same series of tunnels we talked about earlier to go over to the Grand Ole Opry and rise up into the elevators to go through that famous door that I showed you in the other slide to go out onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. And they go in there and hang out with each other. This building also, as every building on the site, was impacted. You get over here, you get into the Money Building. This is the administration building. This is where all the administrators for the Grand Ole Opry were that were on site. There's another building about a mile down the way on the other side of the mall that is there that housed the corporate people. This was the admin building for the facility itself. As you can see, there's lots of stuff that floated out the doors, or lots of bags of garbage coming out the door. So all of their paperwork into these areas have been destroyed, and this building had to be salvaged at the same time. Can you imagine doing 27 buildings plus a 2.1 million square foot hotel at one time? Not very often you run into that, but just scale that down by tenfold and say you're doing a 21,000 square foot facility. And my math may not be right on that tenfold, but anyway, 21,000 square foot facility. But then around it, you've got 27 other facilities to take care of at the same time. You need to do the planning for the biggest and then come down maybe to the smallest. Last but not least is the golf course and the clubhouse. Very elaborate, very expensive buildings. They were connected to the hotel and to the resort area through a series of tunnels that run under Briley Parkway over to the other side of the street. But they were still inundated by the floodwaters, and those buildings had to be taken care of as well. About 3 or 4 total buildings over on the golf course. We also had to coordinate with the people on the golf course to get the golf course restored and to get the greens rebuilt and a lot of different stuff like that in the irrigation equipment. A lot of that equipment came out of the tunnels that got wet at the same time. Again, a total of 27 other properties, buildings on the property. We have to admit, we don't even know the name of this building. We don't know what the purpose of it was for. It was just one of the other buildings on the property, and it was referred to the building out back. And so that was another large facility, two-story facility that was on the property there that had to be dealt with. You can see carrying deskants over to the building. Deskants and generators are set up, and people are working feverishly to get this done. So it's a picture of just some folks working inside, maybe in the later stages, but every square foot of the 2.1 million square feet had to be cleaned and sanitized. It was obviously Category 3 water. Different contractors had to pull together to make different things work. Yes, electrician got in the way of the sheetrockers, and the sheetrockers got in the way of the plumbers, and so forth and so on. But everybody had to pull together and to make this work in a very short order as it could be, being the size of it. We hadn't even talked about the loss of revenue that the hotel is experiencing in this. If you take, I think it had almost 3,000 rooms in it. You take people staying in 3,000 rooms each night, and you go over the revenue that's lost from the hotel, and that is a small part of the revenue that is lost from the resort, because people spend more money in the restaurants, and people coming in to visit the convention centers, and people coming in to do different things, and they ever make off of the hotel itself. So their revenue loss was enormous, which added to the pressure to be able to get this place opened back up as quickly as we could before they had real problems. Opryland closing cost the city of Nashville's economy $50 million just from it being closed for the length of time that it was closed. Well, that's money that goes into the economy of any city. So you not only had people from Opryland putting pressure on to get this place back restored, you had the governor, you had the mayor of Nashville, you had different city leaders, different business leaders around town that really wanted to get this place back open. This was not on the Channel 2, 4, and 5 news occasionally. It was on the news every day, showing everything that was going on. So a little bit of extra added pressure as we proceeded to try to get this place put back into perspective where they could get back open. Some hidden issues: you had expected cost versus actual cost. It was first estimated that the first estimate to come out, they thought it'd run between 150 and 400 million to put it back together. That's a pretty wide range. That's just somebody's wild guess, but when you're setting reserves on day 3 and you don't really know anything about anything yet, or even how big the place is, you know, you have to take a wild guess. But there were a lot. So this projection and some of the upper echelon, the leaders of the park, thought this number was extremely high. They had $50 million or so in flood insurance, and they thought that the damage may be contained to that area. So, as usual, they're going to come to the contractor and ask, hey, how much could I set my reserves at? So that's a question you've got to be prepared to answer. A good answer is, I don't know. I mean, you're a contractor, you're not a reserve setter, so don't be afraid to say, I don't know, there's somebody else's place to put that in perspective. How much is it going to cost to fix? Well, again, we talked about 150 to 400 million, but different things were coming across every day. They thought maybe the 50 million would handle it. Estimates as high as 200 were thought to be overblown. Back to that in just a minute. The actual cost of this actually wound up running over $225 million. Now keep in mind they had $50 million in flood insurance. The revenue from the company that owns the Gaylord, they had about 180, almost 190 million in cash and 290 million in credit available. So your first thought is, wow, they've got plenty of cash, they got plenty of credit, they got plenty of insurance, because you can't forget that $50 million insurance policy. So we're going to get paid pretty quickly on this job because there's enough money to go around. But also, they started exploring legal resources from the resort. The forecast put out by all the forecasters in the area, the TVA, the river, people that forecast river flooding, about the levees, the forecast had forecast this to be a much smaller flood than it was. It caused Opryland not to take some of the normal procedures they may take to protect their assets. So then they started talking about maybe mitigating against or litigating against some of the other people that are there that may make them share a portion of the loss that they made. The thing that you need to be concerned about that is that delays your payment, because while they're arguing about how much you're going to get paid to do for something, then they're holding the money up till they say who's going to pay for it and who's left holding the bag. Now the mitigation costs, forget construction, forget putting the marble back in and doing all the reconstruction and fixing all the stuff that got damaged, but the mitigation cost alone was likely between 50 and 60 million. And that's a pretty good wad of cash. Now you got to take your chunk out of that. Now let's just say we said there were 61 contractors and subcontractors on the job, and let's say everybody there was equal. Each contractor there has $1 million invested. $1 million invested. Now, as we know, they're not all equal, and some contractors would have $5 million invested and some would have $200,000 invested. So they're not all equal, but just for the sake of the conversation, let's just say that every subcontractor or contractor's piece of the pie on it was $1 million. The work was performed in May of 2010. And obviously, as work's getting paid, you have to pay your vendors and your suppliers and your stuff like that. So you think, I'll recoup that $1 million pretty quick, until you read the bottom line with the first payment coming in May of 2011. So if you're not prepared to adjust for those numbers, that would be a huge shock. So that's also something that you need to be considering when you're putting your plan together. How will you keep your boat afloat in a flood in the sea of large loss for that long? How do you make that happen? And if the answer is I absolutely cannot make that happen, well, that's when we need to get with Bill and Dick and Scott and go over a plan and put together a plan of how do we make this happen if we're out a huge chunk of change. It's over my line of credit, it's over my cash flow, it's over my allowance, but we don't want to turn down a good job when it comes along. Once again, put this in perspective. If you're working on a $100,000 job and you can't afford to put 50 or 60 out for a year, or if you're working on $1 million job and you can't afford to put out 400,000 to 600,000 for a year to wait on it, or if you're working on a $5 million job, it's all relative to the same amount of money. So, but just keep that in mind, but you've got to put together a financial plan. You can't plan this after the job starts. The only thing you're saying when the job starts is that you're going to make a whole lot of money and that things are going to go really well. And that can be true. You can make a whole lot of money and things can go well, but it's going to be due to the planning that you put into it before that phone call is made. just a few of the sharks that will be swimming around you in this sea of large loss. Hotel and per diem for your workers. Insurance companies have the luxury of paying you a year later. You don't have the luxury of paying for the hotel even a day later. You have to pay for hotels and per diem for your employees before they occur. Labor cost. Labor sources are not going to wait on you to get paid. They really don't care if you get paid or when you get paid or if you get paid. All they want is a check at the end of the week to pay for the labor that you've hired to come out and do this job. Vendors. If you go buying supplies and vendors, you usually can get 30 days. They usually won't start screaming till 60. By the end of 90, they're doing worse than screaming, and you're not able to sleep at night. So these vendors had to be paid. Equipment fuel. On this particular job, we run about 8,000 gallons of fuel per day. 8,000 gallons of fuel per day. Now, times that by about $5 that we were paying for it, and see how much money was going out the door every day. We were there about 45 days. So do the math. 8,000 gallons of fuel per day for 45 days, and you'll see what your fuel costs alone were going to be. You got code enforcement. You got all this equipment set up, and these generators running, and about 2 weeks into the project, some little guy with a yellow light drives up and, well, your generator's too close to the exhaust fan on the building. Well, yeah, it's been there 2 weeks, sir. Well, I know, but you're going to have to move it, which means you have to move 15 other pieces of equipment to get it up to codes. So you have a lot of code enforcement. Are you blocking the sidewalks? Are you blocking the fire lanes going into the building? Are you blocking fire exits? Are you blocking streets, entrance and exits? So you have to deal a lot with code enforcement on the project. You're better to know this up front and to anticipate part of it and try to deal with as much as you can of it up front than you are trying to deal with it in the end. I'm going to skip consultants in this circle for a moment. They're a whole different animal to deal with. But supplies, if you need to run to this place and that place, you get tons of supplies. You got cleaning towels, you've got saw blades, you've got all kind of supplies that you're going to need to make this job run. You remember I told you how many miles of tunnels were in the building, not one light in the tunnel after it went underwater. So for all those miles and miles and miles of tunnels, we had to string lights so that the people could see how to work in them. Remember, we're 2 stories underground at that point, so there's no natural light coming in. So that was a big supply that had to be taken into consideration. Transportation and freight. If you can imagine getting transportation and freight for 78 trailer truck loads of equipment in, and just do the math on 78 trailer truck loads of equipment coming as far away as some of them is California and other places. So a ton of freight and transportation, not only to pay for, but you have to organize it coming in, you have to organize it going out, you got to load it when it gets there, you got to unload it when it gets there, a lot of different things like that. Then you've got adjusters roaming around. They're actually the least people you're going to see on jobs at over $100,000. They're generally the nice guy, and they're in the background, and they're really not saying much. But it's the consultants that's at 1 o'clock in this photo that you really have to deal with. Adjusters start to hire consultants now, and the consultants do the footwork for the adjusters. They do the analyzing of the invoices that you submit. They chop them down. On a recent one we submitted at 1.4 million on a job for the first week. They chopped it down to 423,000 just in 1 week, and that was their analysis on this particular job for the first week of the project. So consultants are there to try to consult for the insurance company and to reduce your pricing. So you need on your team a set of consultants that can come out and consult for you and to deal with these guys, so you can figure out a way to meet in the middle, assuming that the person who has hired you wants you to deal with the consultants and that they want you to deal with the insurance company. They may want you to deal strictly with them, and they may want to be the person who's dealing with those kind of folks. These are just some of the things you're going to have to deal with on the job. And what that also means is you probably need a project manager over each and every one of those subtitles there. You need somebody over labor, you need somebody over vendors, you need somebody over fuel, you need somebody over codes, consultants, suppliers, adjusters, freight, hotel and per diem. I don't even have equipment on there, so you need somebody in charge of equipment. So you've got to have somebody in charge of all this. If you think you can handle it all on a job of this magnitude, you're probably in the wrong business. You can't even handle it all on a job of $200,000 or $300,000. It takes a team that you need to put together before you get to the job site. Before you get that phone call, you need to have this team of people put together so when you get there you can know what's going on. In conclusion, you've got to know how to work your plan. And you got to plan your work and work your plan to get that done. So it's always important to have a plan. If you go out and try to do a $100,000 large loss, or a $200,000 large loss, or a $50 million large loss, and you don't have a plan to work on, you have failed before you even got to the job site. So you've got to plan your work. You plan for the worst and hope for the best. And always have a backup plan. No matter what your plan is, have a backup. My plan is called ABC Labor Source because I've used them 40 years and they're the best in the country. They've always done me well, but you need to have a backup. Because in a major flood like this in Nashville, we're dealing with about 10 or 15 square miles of Nashville. You heard in the original newscast report, the worst flooding was in Franklin and Brentwood, Tennessee. It's 30 miles away from this resort. So ABC Labor Source has got people in Franklin and Brentwood working. They got people all over the state working. In this particular stream of floods, we had jobs from Kalamazoo all the way to the Northeast. I mean, I think we're in 17 states at the same time of different major flood events. So ABC may be busy. So have a backup for ABC. Have a backup for everything you have. You have a backup plan or two so you know that you can handle that and that you can be able to keep going while you're going. Make contractual agreements with your team well in advance. This is not something you want to do across the hood of your truck when you're looking at a flooded building. This goes again whether you're dealing with a 20,000 square foot building or a 2 million square foot building. You talk to people, it's going to be on your initial first two teams, your team and your backup team. Talk to them first. Lunch is pretty cheap. Go to lunch with them. Say, hey, I know we're going to be getting some of these projects and we need to talk about this. If I owed you $40,000 on a job and I didn't get paid for a year, are you on my team or what are your terms? What have I got to do? And you get an answer then. If you ask that answer when you're 90 days past due, the answer will always be the same. You're past due. You should have already paid it. We didn't have that agreement up front. So you need to have this conversation well before a job happens with all of your vendors, all of your suppliers, all of your equipment providers, all of your consultants, everybody on your team. You've got to have this agreement up front and to know what's going on and to see which people are the most favorable for you to work for. Now, I will say not many are going to just say, I'll wait till you get paid. Okay, that's not normal and not customary, and it's probably not going to happen very often. So you don't really need to go after people that's going to say that. But you do need to have a good understanding and to know that people are going to work with you. And what if you're charging $500 for a generator and the big green machine rolls in and they're charging you $580 a day? And so, you need to know if they're going to work with you on pricing, or if they have set pricing that you would want to go through in advance with them to make sure that your numbers go good with their numbers, so you can make money and you can become a hog or a pig. Don't be a hog. Just be a little pig. You need to make good money on what you do, but don't get too hoggish on it. But have those well in advance, not the day that it hits. Have your financial agreements in place. Delayed payments with your team, we just talked about a little bit. Have your lines of credit in place. What are you going to do if you hit that big job and you need a big influx of cash? How are you going to handle that? Again, whether it be a $100,000 or $100,000 job or a $1 million job, you've got to make sure that you've got the cash flow to handle that, because believe it or not, cash is king. And if you don't have the cash to float the boat, then you'll drown in the sea of large loss. That's what we're here to try to help you to keep from doing, and to try to guide you in the correct path. Remember, always try to underpromise and overproduce. It's very, very, very easy to go in and tell somebody that you can hang the moon, but then when you don't hang the moon, at the end, you're the loser in it. So try to underpromise and overproduce. Give ranges when you're put in a spot. How long will it take to get this done? Well, I think it'll take between 3 weeks and 6 weeks. Give yourself a range, and then as the project starts, you can speed the project up, you can slow the project down. But in that first 3 to 5 to 7 days of a project, depending on how big it is, you really don't know what's going on yet. It takes a while on the larger projects to get your arms around it, and takes a while to see what's going on. So give yourself a little leadway. I think the best way that I would advise you to do that, again, is with a range. Don't tell people, oh, I can do it in 3 weeks, when you think it might take 6. So give them a range somewhere in there that gives you some leadway. Large loss are very fun. After the first week or two, the most stressful thing that you'll go through in the first week or two, if you don't have your planning in place, if you don't have your house in order, and you don't have your team members, your vendors, your suppliers ready to go and on your team, it'll be very, very, very stressful. So the way to keep from doing that is to have your house in order, have your game plan down, and be ready to go. So if you do that, you can be very successful anytime you go out on a large loss. By the way, most large losses around the country are determined to be at about 100,000 and up. Today we've been talking about the most extreme measures, but if you can handle the most extreme large loss, the smaller ones will be very much easier. So thank you. This presentation is on behalf of the Crest Network, and we look forward to working with you in the future.